Michael P. Kube-mcdowell, the QB is an addition that's part of his writer's alias, had written a few science fiction novels before the release of Before the Storm in April of 1996. His novel The Quiet Pools was a Hugo Award nominee, so makes sense. Banta was looking at their authors who had won awards or been nominated for awards and contacted them to see if they were interested in writing a Star Wars novel. From a frequently asked questions that I'll link in the description, McDowell was allowed to pretty much write whatever he wanted as long as Lucasfilm approved it. So his Star Wars books are much more on the military sci-fi side than pretty much any of the other novels we've seen to date. Before the Storm made it to number 10 on the New York Times paperback bestseller list for the week of April 7th, 1996. And was ultimately on the list for 2 weeks. When I think about Before the Storm, basically my memories were that Lando goes on a stupid side quest and that Luke is taken in by an attractive woman. You may notice that that completely disregards the plotline that's happening with Leia and Akbar and Han and everyone else. And yeah, that's right, I did not remember the Black Fleet crisis that gives this trilogy its name. So rereading it in a way was more akin to reading the book for the first time, simply because I had not remembered a huge subplot in any detail. So a brief summary. It is a time of peace for the New Republic. New worlds are coming forward asking to join, and Leia begins negotiations with the Duskin League, a group of planets deep in the core Nacht cluster. Meanwhile, Luke is not sure what to do with his life, so he heads off with an attractive lady in a quest to find his mother, and Lando becomes involved in this mission to get inside a mysterious floating vagabond. So I'll start off this time with my favorite character, Lando. I actually don't mind the vagabond ship plot, except for one thing. At this point in the story, it feels like it's going to have no relevance on the greater things that are happening in the galaxy, basically the Duskin League's maneuverings. So I almost wish that this could have been separated from the trilogy and maybe put into its own story, because it's interesting. I mean, we've got Lando and Lobot sort of clashing with the intelligence officer that they have to deal with. They also have R2-D2 and C-3PO, and unlike in the Corellian trilogy, Lando is not nasty to them. He has 3PO along on this mission because he knows that he has skills that are useful. I also like that Lando, when faced with pretty much the galaxy's version of the Flying Dutchman, is like, yeah, there must be loads of treasure on board. Oh, Lando, never change. Luke is not sure what to do with himself. He's not sure what role he can really play in the Jedi Academy anymore. This is awful similar to what he was going through in the Corellian trilogy. So I guess this has clearly been weighing on his mind for a long time now. I find it interesting that he gives the Jedi Academy over to Streen, because I feel like, especially in the later books, like the New Jedi Order and stuff, that Streen was sort of sidelined by Cam Solusar and Tion, but it really shows that, yeah, he's a great Jedi at this point and Luke trusts him. Luke's Force abilities, though, definitely skew more on the side of Superman than in, say, the Thrawn trilogy. And if you've seen any of my reviews, you know I don't like when Luke is the Superman just doing amazing feats. He does some pretty amazing feats here. He rebuilds Darth Vader's rock fortress. It's just like, there's no doors or anything. There's no furniture. He's just like hermiting it up in there. Not sure how he's alive. He doesn't seem to eat or anything. And then a beautiful lady somehow makes her way into his rock fortress and says, I know who your mother was. Come on a quest with me. And Luke just goes. He doesn't look into her background or all. He's like, well, she could find her way into my rock fortress. I trust her. Okay. And he's sort of dismissive of Leia, weirdly dismissive. Leia really wants his help and he's like, you could do it yourself. I don't know, it's sort of weird that Luke would be in this strange place where he's questioning his Force abilities and his role in the universe, but he doesn't want to see his sister at all. He lets Han come once. He doesn't let Leia know where he is at all until he shows up wanting to question her about their mother again, and she understandably is upset. And then Luke's journey with Akana, we don't get very much at this point. They head to Lukazek, which is the last known place that Akana knew the Falanasi were. They're ambushed by Imperials? Luke says they're Imperials. I don't know that this is ever confirmed, so this was a little confusing for me. Akana gets very upset that he kills people, understandably so, but in a way that seemed not the Luke that we've seen in the recent books either. In the Krellin trilogy, he was really going out of his way to make sure that he wasn't killing people, so when he was shooting at their ships, he was shooting to disable, but not to blow them up. So Luke just going ham, slashing down possible Imperials. Not sure how I felt about that. And really, they're on Lukasek so briefly, they're ambushed, Akana finds a message in the current, and then they leave, and that's it. I guess we will see what happens with them in book 2. But I don't know, I don't quite like McDowell's interpretation of Luke, so it's hard for me to feel really involved in this subplot. There are some interesting ideas about Obi-Wan and Yoda and Force Hermits, which of course is completely destroyed by the prequels. But it was interesting, basically, that the stronger you get in the Force, the more you have to withdraw from the universe as a whole, which I'm not really sure I buy either. Interesting. Leia is going through a lot in this book. She's been chief of state for 5 years now, and she's having to negotiate with the Viceroy Nil Spar of the Duskin League. Nil Spar really manipulates Leia and pretty much lies left and right so that he can turn people against her and, I don't know, start the Yevthin quest of colonizing and massacring other planets. What I find hard to buy here is 2 things. Number 1, that the viceroy of a cluster of planets who has no interest in joining the New Republic is allowed to negotiate day after day after day with the chief of state herself. Surely Leia has so many things that she needs to address right now that it just, as soon as he showed no interest in joining the New Republic, why didn't she send someone else to do the negotiations? Not a minion, just another minister. It just seems like such a waste of her time. And second, it's a little hard for me to accept that Leia is so completely duped here. I know that Leia, on a whole, in the Bantam era books, is unwilling to use or grow her Force abilities, but it strikes me as a tiny bit unrealistic that she'd be able to be taken in so far. Nil Spar turns everyone against her so fast, and as it happens, she's completely flabbergasted and taken aback, and she had no expectation of this. She says at one point that surely she should have been able to sense this, and I have to agree with her. Like, yes, there are some species we know that you're not able to probe with the Force, Hutts being one of them, I think Toydarians from the prequel trilogy being another, but it's like she doesn't even try with Nil Spar. She just takes him at face value, and then his sudden and inevitable betrayal is such a shock to her, and such a shock that she's seriously considering resigning, which we know she won't because 2 years later in the Krellian trilogy she's still chief of state. But it's such a crisis of conscience for her, and I find it a little unbelievable. I guess, too, for a book that places such emphasis on the Empire is defeated, we haven't had to deal with the Empire in a while, the fact that Leia is able to completely disregard this missing fleet of 40-plus ships strikes me as unlike her. Yeah, so you haven't had an attack from the Empire in a while, but people mention that Dala is still out there as a threat. So the fact that a pencil pusher comes back and says, hey, we found this list of all the ships and correlating the ones that were destroyed and the ones that we recaptured, there's a whole bunch that are missing. And Leia's just like, yeah, they were probably destroyed. Okay. You tell yourself that, but I think those ships are going to play a big role in the books that are to come, Leia. Han is apparently somehow still a general. From the books so far, I thought it was pretty clear that he resigned during the courtship of Princess Leia and hadn't really been serving since, but apparently recently Akbar assigned him to be personal security liaison to the chief of state, and so he's still a general, but he's not really on duty, and he's just being a stay-at-home dad. That's until Leia starts to mistrust one of her generals and sends Han off to accompany the mission. He's just there, though, takes over because she gets mad at the general, but then the general's reinstated. I think we'll see more of Han's military role in later books, but for now, he's just here. He's just Leia's inside man, I guess. Chewbacca heads off to visit his family and takes the revamped Falcon with him, and that's it. He just heads off. I guess this is maybe a plot point that we will pick up in later books, but for now, Chewie's gone. He's just completely out of the picture. I was a little surprised there. I almost expected Han to go with Chewie to visit his family, but nope, Chewie just went on his own. That's it. Goodbye. McDowell also introduces a number of new characters, as the writers of these books are wont to do. So we have Hiram Drayson from Chandrilla, who's the head of Alpha Blue, some sort of a New Republic intelligence that answers to no one. And he's one of the people that Leia refuses to listen to. Leia comes across as very stubborn here because you have multiple people telling her things that she does not want to hear. Drayson is one, and Admiral Akbar is another. Then we have General Abbott, who's the general of the 5th Fleet that Han temporarily displaces. I don't really have much of a sense about Abbott's character at this point, other than he's completely loyal to the New Republic. And since he's a relatively new officer in the New Republic fleet, Leia is not as familiar with him as she is with others. I guess, though, him being a general brings back something that I was confused about during the Jedi Academy trilogy, which is, why are these generals in charge of fleets? Because I always thought that general was more of the ground forces position, and that admiral obviously was the fleet position. But no, I guess we got fleet generals too. Anderson made precedent with General Antilles in the Jedi Academy trilogy, so I guess, yeah, they're showing up here too. We have Akana. We don't know very much about Akana other than she's a Falanasi, which is a Force user outside of the Jedi Order, and sort of like the Witches of Dathomir, they take a different approach to the Force. They manipulate something they call the White Current, and she can read messages left in the current. That's really all we know about her and her abilities so far, but hopefully we will learn more, because I always like learning about the different Force traditions out there, that obviously there's more than just the Jedi, and they approach the Force very differently. So I said in my intro that Before the Storm is much more military sci-fi than any of the books we've encountered so far in the Bantam era. What I mean is that there is a lot of focus on fleet movements and potentially battles. We haven't really had any battles at this point. It's mostly drills and maneuverings and going out on tours. And there's also a lot of focus on ships and the people in the ships. I don't know, I'm not a big military sci-fi fan. I'm fine with sort of the X-Wing series where we've got dogfight battles and then them going undercover as commandos and stuff. But the big overarching battles aren't as interesting to me. Likewise, McDowell introduces a new class of starfighter, the K-Wing, which is sort of, I guess, like a bomber, like a Y-Wing, in that you have a pilot and then the one that shoots. He also reintroduces a starfighter class from the Empire comic, the E-Wing, and this is the ship that Luke has been assigned by Admiral Akbar. So he does not have R2 because R2 won't fit on the astromech slot. He has a completely new astromech droid, an R7. I don't particularly care about either the K-Wings or the E-Wings. And battles-wise, like I said, there's not really been any battles at this point. An astronomical survey ship was destroyed by the Yevithans, and then they come in and destroy all the colonies of other aliens that were residing in their sector. But most of those scenes are from the point of view of the people who are there, the people who die, or in the case of the one TIE Interceptor pilot, the one person who gets out to tell them what happened. So we'll see. I'm sure that there are battles coming in books 2 and 3, and hopefully I can follow along with what's happening and I find them interesting, even though that's not my favorite part of Star Wars books. Han also has some weird thoughts about his children, particularly about Jason. He's really worried that Jason's going to become pudgy and that Jason doesn't want to play sports and that Jason just wants to use the Force for everything. What? I'm sure that a lot of children go through a stage where they don't want to do things that they used to enjoy doing. So just because Jason doesn't want to play ball doesn't mean that he's a failure as a child. Han never says he's a failure, but you sort of get the sense that he's disappointed in him simply because he doesn't want to play catch with Dad. So I just don't understand this focus on Jason. I guess because he's the oldest son. But Han has other kids who probably would want to play ball. If one of them doesn't want to do that, just try another one, Han. I also found Before the Storm surprisingly short. I think part of it was the font size of my library book, but it was 307 pages, 15 chapters. I felt like it just flew by. And the title Before the Storm was very apt because it's just a lot of build-up. Neil Sparr's betrayal doesn't come until, I want to say, the last third of the book. So it's basically, I guess, setting the stage for the storm that is to come. But I'm not particularly fond of setup. So this is perhaps another example of, did this have to be a trilogy? Could this maybe have been a duology? However, I know that Bantam was very stuck on the putting out one trilogy a year between 1994 and 1998, so I guess I'll have to let that slide. So, in reading the Bantam Star Wars books, have you said to yourself, man, I really wish there was a lot more focus on the military and the fleets and the officers and what they're doing? Well, then you will probably like this book. If you don't like that, though, it's a little bit of a rough going, simply because Leia is so frustrating here. She's not willing to listen to anyone. She's completely made up her mind, and unfortunately, she's made up her mind incorrectly. Lando's mission is interesting, but I suspect completely irrelevant to the plot as a whole. Luke is weird, trying to find himself, and currently lollygagging around the galaxy with an attractive lady. And Han is possibly going to be drawn into more military things as well. So I'm hopeful that Leia will improve in the next 2 books, because right now, really the only person I'm rooting for is Lando. And that's just par for the course, because I love Lando. So next time, I'm going to be jumping to the time between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi with Shadows of the Empire by Steve Perry.